Right, 14 minutes past 9 this morning. We're turning back to rugby and to the Heineken Champions Cup. Cian Tracey is with us of the Irish Independent. Cian, let's start with Munster. 50 points away from home and not really a glove landed in the second half. Where are Munster at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ger. It's a hard one to get your head around, really. I mean, when you look at their last three games, I mean, at such a crucial point of the season, they've gone to pot, really. 130 points, 18 tries, and like 80 of those points in the last two games were against teams like the Scarlets in Glasgow, who aren't even in the knockout stages of the Champions Cup. So I would say, you know, their attack has definitely improved. We saw that again on Saturday, despite the heavy defeat. They still managed to score 5 tries. They scored a couple of really nice tries, albeit I think the 2 late consolation tries put a bit of gloss in the scoreline that probably didn't reflect really how dominant the Sharks were. So I think a lot of the problems of old that we saw in the early part of the season, where you could almost kind of excuse it because it was a new coaching team coming in, new ideas, players looking to adapt. Whereas, and to be fair, they did cure those kind of ills. So what I'm talking about is their work around the breakdown, which was a real Achilles heel for them at the start of the season, and that came back to haunt them once again. And like at this stage of the season, I don't think there's any excuses for that. They just seemed like Craig Casey was exposed so often, and I think so much of that was down to the pack leaving him exposed. They didn't look like they knew how many numbers to commit to the breakdown. The Sharks counter-upped them off the ball. So, I mean, Munster's pack has probably been an issue. Well, it has been an issue for a while, and certainly their front row has been an issue. And they're the same old problems, really. And even if you have a new coaching staff coming in, when you don't have the personnel to, I would say, compete with the likes of the big South African teams, your Leinsters of this world, it's going to come back to bite you. And that's what happened again. So defensively, really, really poor. Their set piece wasn't great. Like their scrum was demolished, breakdown obliterated. And yeah, so there are concerning signs. I think, you know, they've got to go back down to South Africa now again in 2 weeks for 2 games against the Stormers and to play the Sharks again to not only save their season this year in terms of their URC playoff hopes, but also to save next season. Because if Munster don't qualify for the Champions Cup next season, like it's pretty unthinkable really for a province of that size, isn't it?
Well, it's going to have a knock-on impact on season ticket sales and big games and your ability to recruit and just, you know, we know the difficulties and the pitfalls. So all of a sudden, all the eggs are in the URC basket and there's just no sign of a performance coming.
Yeah, like I don't know. Like I was kind of putting last weekend, or the week before last weekend against Glasgow, down to just a bit of a blip, a kind of a post Six Nations hangover. But it's not like a Leinster where you're welcoming back a load of Ireland stars. Okay, Tyke Byrne is out injured. Conor Murray came back, but he seems to be second choice at Munster now behind Craig Casey, and Peter O'Mahony then is the only one you're having coming back. So you can't be relying on like these kind of guys to lift the standards. Like we see it in time and time again. You look at Leinster a couple of weeks ago, the likes of Rhys Ruddock or Luke McGrath maintaining the standards while other guys are away, and that just isn't happening in Munster at the moment. So look, the conditions I think were a factor as well. I think it got up to about 29 degrees, I think, at one point in Durban on Saturday. The humidity was off the charts as well. But I mean, I don't think these are really excuses that Munster will look to. And to be fair, they didn't. Like Peter O'Mahony was speaking afterwards, he didn't look to use it as an excuse. But, you know, Munster have spoken so often this season about how the speed of their training has gone through the roof. And I've no doubt that it has, particularly compared to what they would have been used to under the previous regime. But their fitness let them down, I thought, at the weekend, allowing for the difficult conditions. I mean, when they came out for the second half, and like it's very important to remember, there was only 3 points in the game at half time. Was it 17-14? I think it was off the top of my head. So like only 3 points, and then to totally collapse. I don't know, was it a mental thing? But to me, it looked like a fitness issue, because they came out for the second half and they looked absolutely gassed. Whereas I think the Sharks knew that they were going to have them once they came to the crunch. And as soon as the Sharks cranked up the heat, pardon the pun, in terms of the power that they were bringing, Munster had absolutely no answer to it. And I wouldn't mind, but last week in the press conference build up to the game, Graham Rowntree was speaking about, how it was so important that Munster didn't give the Sharks easy access into the game, because they didn't want to be defending mauls. Like, they knew how strong the Sharks maul was. And yet after half time, Bongi Imgamangi, sorry, that's a bad pronunciation. The Springboks hooker scored 2 maul tries within the space of about 5 minutes, and that was the game done and dusted. So from having gone from being 3 points down, all of a sudden the game was dead and buried, and it got away from them. And like I said, 2 late consolation tries shouldn't detract from how far off Munster were from the Sharks.
As you say, Cian, the weather factors obviously had to play some sort of an impact. It was interesting to listen to Peter O'Mahony speaking afterwards, where he's talking about the breakdown being a serious issue yesterday. You know, disruptive, and they just weren't clinical. So is that an ongoing problem? Is that a deep-rooted issue, or is that something that can be fixed quite quickly?
I think it can be fixed. Like I said, it was a problem in the early part of the season, and they did seem to fix it. But like, to me, it just looked like, and it kind of made this point, that the players looked confused about how many men they were supposed to be committing to each ruck. And what happened then was they'd slow ball to play off, and then when they did eventually have the ball, Craig Casey was being snagged by Sharks players who were absolutely flooding the breakdown. So it was a point that Graham Rowntree made afterwards. It was just that the Sharks were reloading really quickly, and Munster just couldn't deal with that. So I think when they were doing their analysis of this Sharks team, they would have known exactly what was coming. But there's a serious power deficit in that Munster pack, and you know, it's harsh enough to say it, but until they address that problem, and I think particularly in the front row, Munster are going nowhere fast. And as harsh as that sounds, I think that that's just the reality of the situation. And I think any Munster supporter who's being honest would reflect that as well. They're nowhere near being a Heineken Champions Cup winning team this season. That's fair enough. But to go into a last 16 clash and knockout clash, like, it's just, Munster aren't used to being blown out of the water like this. So you look at their recruitment over the last couple of years, and I know I've spoken to you guys about it before, like they brought in, someone like Malachi Fekitoa this season, whereas the budget could have been spent on trying to get a front row in. So they're going to have to look at that over the off season, post World Cup, to try and get a big hooker. I think a big hooker. I know they were linked with Malcolm Marx in the past. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, you need to have an enormous checkbook to attract him. And as Jerry, you made the point that if there's no Champions Cup rugby next season, then it's going to be very difficult to attract these big names. But that's ultimately what Munster need. I think they do have a few exciting players coming through the academy. Even you look at the 20s, guys like Ruan Quinn and Brian Gleeson, but they're back rows, and Munster are already pretty stocked in the back row. It's the front row that really need reinforcements if Munster are going to take the next step. But we've been saying this for I don't know how many years. So it needs, I think, that the board behind the scenes and whoever's making the decisions in terms of the recruitment to come together and realise that until they address this issue, Munster are stalling, I think.
Is there any concerns from a wider Irish rugby perspective that the power deficit when the big South African sides are coming at us is still so pronounced? Bear in mind, even Etzebeth was clutching a bag of ice on the sidelines and didn't even play the full game, and they didn't even bat an eyelid. It was like irrelevant because the next man up is just as strong, if not even stronger. Like, is there a concern? I mean, maybe Leinster might be able to allay those concerns, but we will obviously face South African opposition in the World Cup, that they're just bigger men than us.
No, I think that argument has been kind of put to bed a little bit from an Irish context. I certainly think Leinster have questions to answer. I know we'll get on and talk about them, but like Leinster have been beaten by La Rochelle for the last couple of seasons, and they still have question marks to answer, as well as they're playing and blowing everyone else out of the water. But in terms of an Irish context, like Ireland beat South Africa last November. They beat Australia. They went down to New Zealand and won a tour. They beat France this year. So, like, I think they've kind of answered those questions. I think South Africa at the World Cup will be a different proposition. But like this time last year, we were probably having real concerns about where Ireland were. They'd lost to France. The tour to New Zealand looked really daunting. And all of a sudden, it looks much more positive. So I think we're seeing that in terms of, you look at the Leinster pack that played at the weekend, pretty much an Irish starting pack, and what they did to Ulster by squeezing them to death, really, I think Ireland are capable of doing that against most teams. Obviously, like against South Africa, that's going to be much more difficult. But if you look at the game plan that Ireland are playing under Andy Farrell and how quick the tempo they're playing at, I would have less concerns than I would have had at this stage last year, albeit South Africa in the World Cup are going to be really, really difficult.
Okay, let's talk about Ulster. We can talk about Leinster again. What's the truth about where Ulster are at the moment as well? Because there was some shots fired, but nowhere near enough. And there was never, it looked like a real sense of belief from Ulster that they were going to be able to turn Leinster over.
Yeah, I think the scoreline, is a reflection, I think, of I would say, a considerable gap, if not a large gap, between the two teams. I think the game itself went exactly as I was expecting it. I kind of just made the point there in terms of the Leinster pack doing the number on Ulster. And if you look at that Ulster pack, and it's probably similar to Munster in many ways, I just don't think that pack is going to strike fear into any of the top teams in Europe, really, including the South African team. So I think when you woke up on Saturday morning and saw how bad the weather was, there was a lot of people kind of saying, oh, this could be a bit of a leveler. But I actually thought the complete opposite. I thought it played right into Leinster's hands, because we all know that Leinster, on a dry, fast track like Ireland, can play unbelievably exciting rugby. But they can also do the nitty gritty as well, and their pack absolutely destroyed Ulster. Really, really impressive. So, yeah, Ulster. I think Ulster have stagnated a bit, if I'm being honest. I think they need some fresh ideas in there. Their attack is nowhere near as cutting edge as what it was. Like, you think back to last season, Gerwin, they were rightfully coming in for lots of praise, the likes of Mike Lowry, Balakoon, James Hume, and that was being reflected in the Irish squad as well. And suddenly those guys are nowhere near an Ireland squad now, and that's reflective, I think, in probably the restrictive game plan that they're playing. I think 10 is a major issue for them. Now, to be fair, to give Billy Burns some credit, it doesn't really matter kind of who plays 10 if your pack is being destroyed as it was last weekend. But I just think they lack direction from 10. Like, you can see what Billy Burns is capable of with that lovely crossfield kick for James Hume, but moments like that just are few and far between, particularly in these big games. So I don't know if they maybe need, they lost a couple of key coaches over the last couple of years, and I think we've seen how important they've been. There's been lots of focus on the defence in terms of how important Jared Payne was. He went off to Claremont and Johnny Bell came in. But not a lot was said about Dwayne Peel leaving as well. And he had a massive say, obviously, over the attack. And Dan Soper is taken over there. And I don't know, the attack just, to me, has kind of stalled a little bit. And I think they could do it. Like, I don't know if it's a new coach to come in. I think a different, fresh pair of eyes. And certainly they could do, they're bringing in a couple of new players next season. But you look at the pack, like Dwayne Vermeulen looks a shadow of him, of his former self. I don't think he's getting the go-forward ball that he used to. And when you come up against a Leinster team who you just play right into their hands, I think it was a foregone conclusion, really, despite what the scoreline reflected. Leinster were much, much better. And that's just the reality, I think, of where the power dynamic lies between Leinster, Ulster and Munster and Connacht, if we're being honest.
Like that power dynamic, Cian, and Dan McFarlane almost referenced it afterwards. So I think that's an 11th defeat in 14 games that he's played against Leinster under his tenure. But he said afterwards, it is what it is, isn't it? I can't change the demographics. They've just got way more rugby players, way more earning potential in terms of the money. Pointing out that 14 of the starting team for Leinster were Grand Slam winners with Ireland. But is there almost a resignation? When I hear comments like that, I almost feel like there's a resignation that there's Leinster and then there's a gap.
Yeah, I think you've got to show, I think, a little bit more ambition. And I know we spoke about the conditions there in Durban. The conditions in Dublin were rubbish as well. But I think you've got to show a bit more ambition. I think maybe like Ireland have shown that as well. When you come up against the bigger and the stronger teams, you've got to think your way out of trouble. And I don't think Ulster did that. Leinster's game plan was so smart. They knew how strong the Ulster maul was, which we saw obviously for the Rob Herring try, but Leinster just gave them so few opportunities to get that maul going. They kept anytime they were kicking the ball long, they made sure they kept it in play, which obviously ensured that the ball and play time was quite high then as well, because they wanted to tire out the Ulster pack. And I think for one moment you talk about the power, Shane. I think that the moment for me that summed it up was just after Rob Herring scored the try on 59 minutes, what it brought it back to, 23-15. You were kind of going, okay, maybe Ulster do have a chance here. Ross Byrne takes the kick off, kicks it dead. You get a scrum back on the halfway line, so an Ulster scrum on halfway, and Leinster absolutely pulverised Ulster on their own ball, win the penalty. Ross Byrne kicks it down. Jimmy O'Brien gets held up over the line. Leinster come back for a penalty, and Andrew Porter scores the try. So we hear the players talking about how their next moment focus and not to back up a mistake with another mistake. And we saw that in like ruthless fashion from Leinster. So that was a massive psychological win. I was having a watch back of the game last night. You could see the reaction of the players, guys like Ross Maloney, Tyg Furlong and Andrew Porter. And when you're pushing, your Irish rivals off their own ball in a scrum, it's just massive. And I think it was really deflating. You could almost see the life being sucked out of Ulster and Leinster. It got the try that they needed to push on, and I think, like I said, the game was beyond any doubt then at that stage.
We're getting a lot of grief for not doing enough on Leinster in the comments, but we've actually got the rest of the season to talk about Leinster. That's the whole point here, that for the next few weeks they're literally the only team that we're going to be talking from the URC. Look, Leinster have always been talking about the fifth star, and it has become their guiding North Star for the last period of time. It's going to be a devastating season for them if they don't win the European Cup, given that they're at home for every match. And I would hope the Aviva will be sold out again on Friday. It's Good Friday. What else are people going to be doing? And hopefully the weather's a bit better and they get to play some champagne rugby against Leicester. Yeah,
I'd say they'll be doing well, Ger, to sell out the Aviva Stadium with that much notice on Good Friday, particularly having sold it out this weekend. So yeah, Leicester, I watched them on Friday night against Edinburgh and I was not impressed with them at all, just like I wasn't impressed with them when Leinster wiped the floor with them. I was over in Welford Road last season for the quarter-final, so I think Leinster could put a big score on Leicester, if I'm being honest. This week, Josh van der Flier is a doubt. That would be a blow, but you've got guys like Scott Penny or Will Connors to come in. Caelan Doris and Gary Ringrose, it sounds like, are going to be available again, so the wheel keeps turning from a Leinster point of view. But like you say, it'd be really disappointing if they did go on and win it, and absolutely it would be now, because they could potentially have two finals in Dublin, and that's a massive advantage. Even if you think back to last season's Champions Cup final, and I know it was in Marseille as opposed to La Rochelle, but being in France, it felt like a home game for Ronan O'Gara's lads. So the stars are definitely aligning for Leinster, but I don't think it's a foregone conclusion in any sense of the way, even though they are playing at home. Like, it'd be really disappointing, but it's been really disappointing for the last few years, sure, you'd have to say, because Leinster haven't fulfilled their undoubted potential by adding that fifth star. Toulouse beat them to the drive for five, as they're calling it. So look, they're not shying away from that. That's what's driving them, but they still have questions to answer. Like, in a weird sort of quirk, their run to the final looks like it's going to be the exact same as what it was last season if results go as expected. So you imagine they're going to play Leicester on Friday. Most likely they're going to play Toulouse in the semi-final again at the Aviva, a repeat of last year. And then if La Rochelle get their way, and they had to come through a real scare against Gloucester on Saturday as well, but you kind of felt like that was maybe the speed bump along the way. So it's interesting that the way the cards have fallen, that it could potentially be the same as last year. And I think if you were to speak to Leo Cullen or any of the Leinster players, they would tell you that they would love another crack at La Rochelle in the final, because I think they have some demons that need to be banished.
Good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us, Cian. Cheers.
Cheers, lads.
It's Cian Tracey, the Irish Independent there. And sorry, I didn't realise, but the top tiers at the moment look like they're going to be shut unless there's a surge of early tickets. So 27,000 might be the capacity for the home game this weekend. I don't